Hello class, welcome to the wonderful world of algebra. I know that A word might scare some people, but don't worry, algebra is going to be great. We're going to go real slow and you're going to be awesome at it, so don't worry at all. Before we actually start, I want to make sure you guys understand some of the vocabulary we're going to be using, so please pull up your notebooks and pencil or pen or whatever you want to use real fast. We're going to take some notes on these words. It's very important you understand them. You're actually going to be completely lost as we're talking about some of the things coming up, okay? So the first word we're going to talk about is going to be expression. Now, expression in algebra is not the same thing as an expression in your literature classes. It's something completely different. An algebra expression is anything, any kind of phrase or statement about something that has value. So it represents something that has a value, and it's some kind of a statement or phrase. And that's what an expression is, okay? One more time. It represents something of value, and it's either a statement or a phrase. Now, one kind of expression is an equation. And that is our next word, equation. Now, equation is a kind of expression in algebra where two parts equal each other. You guys have been doing this your whole lives, you just probably didn't know it. So whenever someone asks you, hey, can you please solve this math problem, they're probably giving you an equation. An equation might look something like this. 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's an equation because we have two parts that equal each other. We have the equal sign, we have the part on this side, and the part on this side. So an equation is a kind of expression where there's two different parts that equal each other. 2 plus 2 equals 4. So that would be an equation. Now our last vocabulary word is going to be variable. Now a variable is something that's unique in algebra. You might not have dealt with them before. A variable is when we use a symbol or a letter to represent a number that we don't know. And so you use variables in equations in algebra. So one more time, it's going to be a letter or a symbol that represents a number that we don't know yet. And a lot of times it might be something like X, Y, A, B. Those are examples of variables. I know I probably just scared you because they started using letters and you don't want to do that for. But we're going to talk about letters a little bit more here in a minute. But right now, just know that variables are part of equations, and equations are a kind of expression. Is everybody still with me? Any questions? Okay, so let's move on. One more little hint you're going to need to know before we start is your whole life you probably were taught that this means to multiply something, right? Well, we're not going to be using that. It does not mean multiply. Okay, so whenever you see an X, don't think that means you're going to be multiplying something because you're not going to be using that anymore. Instead, you're going to see a little dot like this. That means to multiply. So this equals multiply. Okay? So dot means to multiply. Now sometimes you're going to see two things together that also can mean to multiply. So if you see like 2b, that also means to multiply because they're right next to each other, okay? And so either a dot or a variable next to a number, or even two variables together, that is going to mean to multiply. So forget about the X. The X is something completely different in algebra, okay? So now that we have this vocabulary down, does anybody have any questions about what we've gone over so far? Or anything we've talked about? Okay, so we're going to start looking at some examples that we're going to solve in algebra. So let's say you were going to the thrift shop, and you had $20 in your pocket, and you bought an $8 pair of pants. So we have $20 minus $8, and that's probably how you've been writing it your whole life. You just write it out like that, and you put your answer. In algebra, we start adding in variables when we don't know what something is. So instead of just leaving this blank, we would put something, I'm going to put an X, because a lot of times you're going to see that X is the most commonly used variable in algebra. So 20 minus 8 equals X. Now I know you guys know this means 12, and so X equals 12. So we just solved for X right there. That was real easy, right? You solved your first algebra problem. Let's try one more real fast before we move on. Let's say you had 15 DVDs, and you went to the store, and you bought 3 DVDs. That would equal X. So obviously X equals 18, right? There, you solved the second algebra problem. That was pretty easy, right? So see how we use X there? X just stands for anything that we don't know yet. That's what we have to solve for, is going to be the variables for the equations. Now, X always has an identity problem. So just remember, whenever you see X, that means we don't know who he is. You have to figure it out. That's what you're going to do. He has an identity problem, and you have to help him find his identity. Now, sometimes it's going to be a Y. Sometimes he has friends B, C, A. They're going to be confused too. Just keep that in mind. Now, they're not always going to be quite this simple and quite this in order. So let's try to look at maybe some more complicated algebra problems that would involve our friend X here, okay? Let's say 3 plus 7 equals X plus 2. Now we know that these two sides equal each other because we have an equal sign here. So this is an equation. So we know that this side over here is the same thing as side over here. So we have to figure out what this X is. So the first thing we need to do is simplify it. Simplifying is when you're going to take the equation and try to make it, and combine as many things as you can before you solve for the variable. So for example, over here, we can solve for this, right? We know what 3 plus 7 is. Obviously, 3 plus 7 is going to be 10. So we know it's 10, but we still don't know what X is. So we have 10 equals X plus 2. So we have 10 equals X plus 2. We can't really simplify anymore on this side because this side's already figured out. We have 10. We know that's done. So over here, we just have to figure out what this X is. And what we have to do, since these are equal, whatever we do to one side, we have to do the other side as well. So to solve for X here, we're going to subtract 2 from this side and then subtract 2 from this side because it has to be the same on both sides. By doing that, we can cross these out, and so now we have 8 equals X. So now we know in this equation 3 plus 7 equals 8 plus 2. 8 equals X. So we solve for the variable here. Now that one was probably something you could have done in your head, but they actually start getting a little bit more complicated. We're going to try some with maybe some bigger numbers here, okay? So let's try 37 plus 48 equals 53 plus X. So we got some bigger numbers here now. We can't just necessarily do this in our head right away. So let's try to start simplifying. Remember, simplifying means solve as much as you can before you solve for the variable. So what would 37 plus 48 be? It would be 85, right? So we have 85 equals 53 plus X. So 85 equals 53 plus X. So we're getting a little bit closer. We can kind of know a little bit more about X now. We know that one side is definitely 85. So over here has to equal 85 too. But how we solve for that is what? You remember? We're going to move this over here. We have to do one thing to one side and one thing to the exact same thing to the other side. So we got to get rid of this X. We want to get the X all by itself. So we're going to take away 53 here. And so we take away 53 here. So we can cross this out. That's done because 53 minus 53 is 0. 0 plus X would obviously just be X because 0 plus anything is just itself. So now we know that X equals 32. So in the equation, we know that 37 plus 48 equals 53 plus 32. So both sides are now equal. So now we solved for our first and second really good equations here, okay? Now we're going to move on to something besides just addition and subtraction. We're going to actually have to get in some division and multiplication as well because you can't just add and subtract. It doesn't always quite stay that simple, okay? So before we move on to multiplication and division, does anybody have any questions about how we did these here? About why we simplified or why we subtracted from both sides, anything like that? Okay, so Real fast, let's try our first division problem, okay?